Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Ethereum, and we're going to provide a general market update. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. Now, it has been a while since we did a dedicated video on Ethereum. We've covered it in passing when we talk about some other asset classes and do more generalized videos. But I wanted to provide just a dedicated video to Ethereum because it has been a while. Now, to bring you up to speed as to my general stance, if we go back and look at videos a few weeks ago, we were talking about going into the merge, right? And after the merge, the idea that the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation was simply completing some type of Wyckoff distribution in the same way that Bitcoin USD did back in 2021. Furthermore, when we looked at the Ether USD pair, we talked about the idea of getting rejected off of the bull market support band. We talked about this in September, but we were also discussing this likely possibility, right? This likely scenario even back, in mid-September when the Ethereum price was actually right at the bull market support band. And it was always this idea that the 20-week SMA will likely continue to knock us down. Now, eventually we'll be able to break through it, but so far that just simply has not been the case. And we want to talk about some of the similarities, where we are today, what are we looking at, and what to really be on the lookout for as we go into the end of the year and even early next year. I'm of the opinion, just to be completely blunt, I'm of the opinion that crypto will remain under a lot of pressure throughout the end of this year and through a significant part of next year. That doesn't mean you have to spend all of 2023 putting in new lows. I just don't think crypto as a whole is going to be seeing any new major all-time highs, not until probably 2024 at the earliest is my guess. Okay, I mean, I've said all year that cash is king and that we are going to have bear market rallies, but I don't think we're going to be making a sustained break to new all-time highs until we get past high inflation and we get past this QT cycle that the Fed is putting on for us. So if we were to go look at where we are today, the price of Ethereum is coming in at around $1,380. So it raises the question, well, where is that with respect to the bull market support band, or if you prefer in a bear market, the bear market resistance band? It has held resistance a number of times during the bear market. It held resistance over here more or less at around 3,400 or so. We did pop our head briefly above it, but it wasn't. We did not really see a follow through on that move. We got rejected by it at around $2,000. We got rejected by it at around $1,800, and now the 20-week SMA for Ethereum is at 1424, and the 21-week EMA is at 1593. So it more or less ranges from around 1400 to 1600. This would be, I believe, where a lot of bears would come out and try to hold this line and say, you shall not pass, right? Like the idea that it's gonna take a huge effort by the bulls to get Ethereum past 1600 in the short term. I'm not saying it can't happen. I just don't think it's the most probable short-term scenario. Now, look, equity markets, major indices like the stock market, like the S&P 500, like the NASDAQ, like the Dow Jones, they've all seen a considerable move to the upside. The dollar, DXY, has been pulling back some recently. So whenever this happens, it leaves some room for risk assets to move higher. But we still we still do find ourselves in a period of quantitative tightening. And again, we still find ourselves in a period of high inflation. So I think we need to at least acknowledge those macro headwinds for the time being. These are not macro headwinds that we were facing over here in 2020 and 2021. We were in a period of quantitative easing, and inflation was still relatively low. It wasn't until later on in 2021 that inflation really started to take off. So, I would still be looking at this area, the $1,400 to $1,600 area, to provide some type of resistance. Now, remember, we talked about these videos. We talked about this in the videos that we earlier this year, back in September, the idea of seeing this sort of secondary Wyckoff distribution phase. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, first of all, if you go look at the Bitcoin, say Bitcoin's chart, you may remember that we really had this like Wyckoff distribution that occurred in early 2021. And then we had sort of a secondary Wyckoff distribution phase that occurred in later 2021. And then going into the merge, this was my general expectation, was that we were just simply looking at a secondary Wyckoff distribution phase, right? Like the same thing as Bitcoin, where you have your first phase over here, and then you have a secondary Wyckoff distribution phase over here. And that's ultimately what played out so far, right? So far, I should say, let me be clear about something. You know, I've been right about things. I've been wrong about things, and you know, being right about something in the past doesn't necessarily mean you're any more likely to be right about something in the future, or being wrong about something in the past doesn't necessarily mean you're any more likely to be wrong about something in the future. So I will say yes. I mean, so far we did see that Wyckoff distribution where we had that sort of the double peak 1-2 punch, where then we came back down. Now we're pressing back up a little bit, and the valuation of the Ether Bitcoin is back to 0.079. So where do I currently stand on this? I mean, to be completely honest, I'm not that optimistic about the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation going, you know, up to 0.09 or something like that. I'm not very optimistic about that potential outlook. I think we could easily just simply be looking at a lower high. I will remind you that in the 2018 bear market, and we've drawn some parallels, right? I mean, they're not exactly the same. Certainly that is the case. I don't mean to make the impression or give you the impression that they are the same, because we know they're not. But there was a one last pump on the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation after this surge that we've compared this most recent one to, where it pumped back up to we had this surge over here where it pumped back up to 0.085. That's what we just saw happen. You know, we just saw that play out, and sort of like the last hurrah of the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation in the bear market. But you'll notice that it didn't just go straight down. And in fact, there were a number of pumps by the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation on the way down where we came right back up. And most recently, you know, the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation went all the way down to like 0.065 or 0.066, somewhere in that area. You know, back here in July 2018, the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation went down to about 0.067, and then we had another pump back up to almost 0.072, and it still didn't mean that there wasn't more downside to come. Now, when you look at this chart, I mean, you can kind of see the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation slowly starting to curl back the other way. I just simply have to remain cautious and keep my bear tinted goggles on until macro headwinds sort of leave, right? And we can sort of see, okay, it makes more sense, right? We're going back into QE or rate cuts and et cetera. But until then, I think it does make sense to be somewhat defensive on this and say, well, you know, I mean, it could still continue to rally for a while. Don't think it's going to be going, on a sustained bull run at this phase. I do think we will get there, and I should be clear about a few things. I am still long-term macro bullish on Ethereum. I mean, you know, I talked about it on my channel when it was $100, and put plenty of videos on my channel calling it the Ethereum accumulation phase of a lifetime back in like 2019 and 2020. But I simply cannot ignore sort of the bear market, the structural bear market in traditional markets, and seeing sort of that bleed over into cryptocurrencies. So, you know, one of the things we also talked about with the Ethereum USD valuation back in early 2018, we had about 128% rally back up to the 20-week SMA. And I did warn you guys about this very type of rally that we were seeing over here going into the merge, and saying, look, there's a lot of similarities between it. And sure enough, it rallied by about the same amount, 128%, just to get rejected at the same place that it got rejected at in 2018. And you'll notice that after we got rejected, we came back up, had a second rejection, came back up, had a second rejection. And then after all of that, we had a low. We had a low over here. We then had a higher low, and then we sort of just slowly trended sideways with a slightly bullish bias for about a month or a month and a half, and then we ended up falling down. So far we have a low and we have a higher low, right? A low and then a higher low. But rather than cherry pick only the bearish scenario, you should also note that back over here at the end of 2018, we also had a low, and then in 2019 we had a higher low, okay? So there are plenty of reasons for the bulls to say, look, it looks bullish. There's some reasons for the bears to say it looks bearish. I think, you know, some of the most compelling reasons for the bears are just, typical bear markets, typical drawdowns from prior all-time highs, and also the recessionary headwinds that we face with high inflation and the Fed raising interest rates into a slowing economy and likely going to see rising unemployment relatively soon. That doesn't mean you can't go up in the short term, right? I don't think these cycles are going to play out the exact same way. I certainly don't think that is the case. Note that if we do break through this bull market support band, if we do break through it, which I do think will be considerably difficult to do, but if we do break through it, I would still expect a year-long sideways range, right? More or less, about a year long, where maybe we go up and we come back down, and then I don't really think it'll make sense to start getting super bullish on the asset class as a whole until probably another year from now. Going into the next Bitcoin halving is likely when we can start to, sort of shift the gears and look towards maybe a more sustained move to new highs. But for now, I think we're looking at this low, a higher low, this low, and a higher low. So far, this is playing out, to me, it looks like it's more so playing out like this so far than it is like this one. I mean, this one had sort of like a higher low and it just bounced immediately and came back up. This one sort of is, kind of hanging out for a while down at these prices, just like it did back over here in 2018. So look, I mean, I think people need to just understand what is the risk involved in the market and then plan accordingly. If we see the floor fall out from underneath us and Ethereum, let's say in a week or two, falls back down to the floor, to the local floor at around $1,200, to me that's going to be a red flag, right? If we go back to 1,200 after maybe a pump to 1,500 or something, if we go back to 1,200 again after that, it's going to start to look more and more like 2018. If, on the other hand, you see Ethereum just slowly continue to press higher and press higher and press higher, then we can begin the argument for saying, all right, well, maybe we're getting into a longer accumulation phase. I do think, there certainly are some things to be cautious about. And then finally, the other thing to remember is that we do have our Ethereum logarithmic regression trend line. This is the thing that we like to, ignore when we're not in it. But a lot of times we will make our way back to that trend line in bear markets, right? I mean, we've made it back to it plenty of times in the past, back in 2015, early 2016, and then in late 2016, early 2017. And then we made it back to it in 2018 and stayed in it until really like 2020 or so. And right now, the logarithmic regression range for the Ethereum valuation fit to non-bubble data is from 474 up to 987. So I'm of the opinion that we will make it to the regression band eventually, whether the price goes down to it or whether the regression band catches up to us. I think it's something that will likely happen before we see a sustained breakout to new all-time highs. That's typically what Ethereum does, right? You kind of go up for a while, and then you come back home, you touch base, and then you go back up again, right? You come back home, you touch base for a while. And I just think we're sort of in that process of coming back home and touching base with the lower regression trend line, again, fit to quote-unquote non-bubble data. And that once we've spent some time in that region, we will likely have the strength to break out, to a more sustained bull run. Until then, structurally, this does continue to look like a bear market. I mean, I know that we can try to figure out reasons why it looks more bullish, but so far, this is nothing more than just a series of lower highs and lower lows. This could be a higher low, but if you had assumed that in 2018 it was a higher low, you would have been disappointed, right? It just sort of slowly went sideways and up for about a month or so, and then we eventually went back down. So I do think there are still remain reasons to be somewhat cautious. If you also look at the 200-week, we're actually sitting at the 200-week estimate right now, or just slightly above it. And if we go to the 200-day, remember, that is where we actually got rejected back in March, okay? And we got rejected at around 3,500. Right now, it's coming in at 1,736, and it's coming down relatively quickly. So, if the 200-day continues to come down like this, and Ethereum goes up to the 200-day, maybe at like 1,600, somewhere in that area, maybe even 1,700 if it can poke its head above the bull market support band again, that's an important level to watch, because if we just simply get rejected by it again, then you're likely going to look down and come back into this range, test that low, and then fall back to these lows over here. So the 200-day SMA is coming down relatively quickly. I think probably the biggest point for the bulls in the short term is just that risk assets are starting to stretch their legs a little bit with this counter trend rally going into midterms. Okay, so a lot of times there have been a lot of times in the past where equities and risk assets will rally into midterms, only to see those gains sort of taken back later on in the year or even early the following year. So I think that's sort of the thing to watch for as we get into November and December. But to just remember that, as always, no one knows exactly what's going to happen in this market. Try to be pretty honest about what I think. And so far, we even talked about the idea of Bitcoin putting in higher lows in January, February, and March, getting rejected itself by the 200-day. Ethereum essentially followed the same path, right? Just a higher low after higher low, and then a failure to put in a higher low, and then we sort of collapse down, right? A rally back up going into the merge, where the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation put in another top at the same level that it did back in mid 2018, and then the expectation that it would come back down after that. And then right now we're sort of in this intermediate phase where the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation is going back up again, but there is going to be a lot of resistance, I think, up here, right? I think there's going to be a lot of resistance up here for it to actually get through, and we no longer have the hype of the merge to support the same type of rally to $2,000 that we had just a couple months ago, right? Just a few months ago. We don't really have that hype anymore. So I think we're just going to simply have to wait until macro headwinds aren't quite as strong, and Bitcoin is starting to look a little bit better, which I do think we'll get to. I think the trick is just try to stick around until the next bull market. Don't get dismayed by this this bear market. These things are very cyclical, and they take a long time to play out. I can't tell you how many times in 2018 I thought the bear market was over, only for it to just flush down again and again and again and again, right? It just happened over and over and over again. And back in 2018, I was a buyer of Ethereum, at around $200 or so. This is where I started to get into the market in 2018, was around Q3. And you can see what happened, right? The floor fell out. We went up for a while, we came back down, and then eventually all of these buys looked relatively attractive, right? It just took a long time to get there. So if you are buying Ethereum now, and we do fall, let's suppose if you buy Ethereum now and we end up falling, it doesn't necessarily mean you're never going to see that again. I just imagine it would be a matter of time before we would eventually break back up to the upside. And if you are taking on the risk right now of Ethereum and it breaks through the bull market support band, well then congratulations, you took a risk and it paid off. But those are my opinions right now on the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation and on the Ethereum USD valuation. Still a lot of macro headwinds, still a bear market until proven otherwise, right? Until proven otherwise, we still remain in a bear market, and the logarithmic regression trend line still sits just below. Okay. And if you think back to the last bull market or the last bear market in 2018, it started in January and it took until the end of the year to get to the regression band, right? It took until December. So really, it took basically the entire year to get there. This one arguably started in November, and we're coming up, on sort of like a full year in this bear market relatively soon. So these are all important considerations. Hopefully you enjoyed the update on Ethereum. In the short term, yes, it could push higher. A lot of risk assets are. In the medium term, there's still a lot of macro headwinds that we're going to be facing, especially as the Fed continues to raise interest rates into a slowing economy. So I still would say there's going to be some bearish bias, some pressure on Ethereum over the coming months. And of course, over the long term, like if you want to take, say, like a 3 to 4 year outlook, I still do remain fairly bullish on the Ethereum valuation. I just think in the short term, it's going to remain under some pressure. Thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe. If you're not subscribed, give the video a thumbs up. We also do have the Into the Cryptoverse premium website, so make sure you check that out at intothecryptoverse.com. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.